everyone. We are so excited to be presenting today. It's been a crazy morning on my end. I had soccer coaching with a bunch of 4-year-olds straight to KEYNOTE, then straight to coaching 7-year-olds, but that's exactly how I'd like to spend my Saturday. So thank you to KEYNOTE for allowing us to sponsor the event. We're really excited to discuss this topic with you today. And I'll pass it over to Tammy to kind of kick off the presentation. We'll do introductions and look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation.
Great, thanks so much, Steve. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tammy Lohr, and I'm a senior manager with Moss Adams, and I help lead a lot of our bond program performance audits to both evaluate compliance and support the application of best practices to enhance transparency, accountability, and the appropriate use of funds to really think about how you're going to maintain trust with your community in the application of these resources. So we can go to the next slide. As Steve mentioned, we're really excited that you've all joined us this morning. Today we'll be covering a little bit more about our team before diving into specifics on how to effectively monitor and oversee bond programs in your role as a CBOC member, especially given some of the trending challenges that we've noticed for these programs throughout our work with a variety of clients in recent years. Next slide. All right. So a little bit more about our team. So our K through 14 team works very extensively with capital programs in schools specifically. Every year we perform over 75 different projects that span project leadership, program management, capital program assessments, construction audits, change order reviews, process improvement projects, and of course, my personal favorite, performance audits. All of these projects are geared towards enhancing capital programs at your district and supporting efficient and effective processes so that you can best use the limited resources that are available to you as a public sector organization. So we look at things like policies and procedures for adherence to regulations like Proposition 39, Public Contracting Code, and then compare your practices to best practices. And since we work very extensively in this space, we have a number of best practices that we are able to draw on from a variety of different organization types and structures.
And I'll just add, just to piggyback off what Tammy was saying, our team is very unique in the sense that we both perform these assessments at various stages for capital programs, and we're actually able to execute the game plan depending on the scope. And what makes that very unique is we understand both sides of the equation. So our team involves performance audit leaders like Tammy, forensic experts and examiners, process improvement experts, people that just focus on policies and procedures, ex-construction project managers, ex-project engineers. So our team is extremely diverse, and we have a lot of really good perspectives collectively as a team. And the reason we've structured that way is we believe we're the most holistic service provider in this space in the market. So, yep. So we're looking forward to your Q&A, and I'll pass it back over to Tammy.
Great, and we can go to the next slide. So as Steve mentioned, we have this team that really focuses on capital programs and construction in school districts. Our team also, of course, specializes in audits that are specifically required for Proposition 39, which does include financial statement audits and any agreed upon procedures that you might need. Moss Adams did start as an accounting firm. We are much more of an advisory firm now, but this is still one of our core service lines as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we talk about best practices and bond program oversight, we wanted to have just a very quick refresher on Proposition 39. I'm sure that most of you are very familiar with this regulation. The proposition was approved by California voters in the year 2000 and requires that bond funds can only be spent on the specific projects listed in the ballot measure. It requires a 55% voter approval for a bond to pass and includes specific accountability requirements, including a financial statement audit and a performance audit be performed annually during the bond's life cycle. Go to the next slide, please. So what is a performance audit? Most people are pretty familiar with the concept of a financial statement audit, but might be less familiar with a performance audit. Performance audits are performed under generally accepted government auditing standards, essentially a subsection of the same standards that your financial statement audits are performed under. It's a specific chapter within that set of standards. And they're able to audit far more than just financial transactions. So they can look at things like compliance, such as compliance with Proposition 39 by only expending funds on projects that are listed in the ballot. Internal controls, such as having the appropriate approvals in place for expenditures. Program effectiveness and results. So that would be things like, are we completing the projects on time and within budget according to what we have communicated to our voters? Or perspective questions. One of those examples that comes up right now is thinking about, what will the impact of inflation be on the overall cost of our capital program? How are we going to be able to stretch our funds and think about some of the trade-offs that we might need to be making? Performance audits can have any of these objectives or a combination of several of these objective types and rely on gathering sufficient and appropriate evidence to support findings. So why a performance audit? Performance audits are designed to provide objective analysis to help those charged with governance, which includes individuals on this call today, to improve operations, reduce costs, and strengthen internal controls. The goal is really to provide you with reliable information that you need to be able to effectively understand potential challenges and make informed decisions. The bare minimum of a performance audit under Proposition 39 requires a compliance review to ensure that funds were only spent on projects listed in the ballot, but an expanded audit can help give you far more information on how your district is achieving efficiency and effectiveness using the limited resources that you have available to achieve your goals. These audits can identify opportunities to enhance contracting practices, change order processes, communications with your stakeholders, and internal controls, depending on the types of objectives that you might want to consider. So when we're working with clients on an expanded performance audit, meaning that we are looking at more than just expenditure compliance, we're able to look at a variety of different things. And these are some of the examples of different areas that we're very well versed in and can provide additional value to our clients when we're doing these performance audits. The first area is procurement and contracting practices. So that would include looking at compliance with public contracting code, district policies and procedures, and identification of opportunities to enhance processes to align with best practices. The next area is the efficacy of public outreach and communication related to the bond program, including things like, what is our progress made to date? Are there any changes to our original plans? And the ability for stakeholders to track specific projects, since you do have a community that is invested in the condition of these facilities and seeing the progress that is being made with those funds. The next area is overall transparency of the bond program by looking at what information is available publicly and how it's organized and put out there to allow people in your community who are interested in a project or the program as a whole to understand exactly what's going on with it. We can also look at compliance with labor regulations, including prevailing wage and appropriate compensation practices, or verification of overtime that might be billed to the project. We also look at the performance and oversight of your CBOC. How are you all working together? How do you understand your role and manifest that role during meetings to effectively oversee the bond program? We can also review your bond program management plan, including things like staffing that is dedicated or allocated to the bond program, and how well you are adhering to design and construction timelines for the program, including comparing that to industry standards and current norms, since we know that those can be moving targets when there's been a lot of labor shortages and supply chain issues like there has been for the last 2 years. We can go to the next slide. So here are even more different areas that we can look at in an expanded performance audit, depending on the risks that you're seeing in your organization as well. So we can look at your project budgets, how you're using technology throughout the planning and construction process, how quickly you're able to process payments. We always want to see those payments processed in under 30 days to make sure that you're compliant with the Prompt Payment Act. And that's really important to get good contractors who want to work with you. They need the funds to be able to pay their employees and keep that project moving. And you have a critical role to play in making sure that they're able to do that. We can review your program and construction management structure. Again, thinking about who is charging their time for the project, is that allowable, and what are the costs associated with the structure that you've put into place? We can look at change orders and how they're approved and processed, which can be an area of high risk. I know Steve will be talking about that a little bit later in today's presentation. We can actually look at how you're delivering your construction programs, the pros and cons of the different models to get the best possible outcomes depending on the capabilities of your district. And Steve will also be talking about that. And then last but certainly not least, looking at how bond program proceeds are used to pay for district staff who are working on the bond program. So you might have individuals who are fully dedicated to the program or people who charge their time as they go. We like to make sure that we're double checking that and ensuring that the spirit of Proposition 39 and the ballot measure are upheld. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve to talk more about what types of challenges we often see in these bond programs and what you should be watching out for as an oversight body.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. So as background, during the 80s and 90s, California experienced tremendous population growth and demand for new schools and construction, as well as the need to modernize and repair and refurbish many of the schools that were built in the 1950s and 60s. So Prop 39 was intended to kind of really upgrade the facilities. And what we're seeing from that, some of the common K-14 bond program challenges that we'll be focused on, the ones in bold today, are inadequate master planning controls, excessive requirements, and scope creep. So when you guys were doing the design plans, did you guys have all the considerations built in, or are you doing an owner-initiated changes after construction starts, which is impacting or creating a lot of unnecessary change orders, overcharges and costly practices? So that could be a lot of things. Are you competitively procuring? Are you using the right contract types where you can, for example, like the guarantee maximum price contract, which we'll talk in at length later, where you can validate that the costs incurred are compliant and not excessive. And if any savings are available, it gets returned to the school district. Inadequate project financial records and reports. I think this is a huge area that we see a lot of districts struggle with, which we'll talk about more in detail, but really understanding the KPIs that we leverage GFOA, which sets the standard of best practice of how to report a capital projects so that you can early detect risk and put in controls in place so that if there is an area of risk that you identify it early on and you're able to take steps, corrective steps in a timely manner. Next, project and schedule delays, which we know, I think during COVID, this was for schools with school being hybrid or offsite. It was actually a way for the schools to increase the schedule significantly. However, as we know, the kids are back in school or it's hybrid where there's a lot more logistics involved. So having those considerations understood upfront is critical. Construction quality issues. So really understanding the material specifications log and requirements for your district, making sure that it's consistent across your entire portfolio of construction. For example, if you have HVAC systems or locks and they're differing per school sites, that can be very problematic from operations. So ensure that you have a consistent material specifications log that's being applied throughout the district is critical. And then for the quality of construction, when you're doing the punch list, making sure that it's meeting the quality, you have good project closeout controls so that when the operations of the school come online, that you know it's good quality. Project funding not aligned with project plans. So I think what's critical here is you get the project plan, you get the funding established up front, you communicate with stakeholders, and you stick with it. And as the intent of Prop 39, as many of you guys know, it's how are there other ways that you can increase funding to maximize the use of the funds. So having those considerations, the reporting, those funds broken out and reported and prioritized in a strategic manner will help you and your school district. Unfavorable contract terms and controls. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but what contracts are you guys using? Are you doing T&M type jobs where a lot of risk are with those contracts if they aren't adequately supervised and monitored, or are you doing lump sum? If lump sum, are you competitive? Do you know that you're competitively procuring those? Or if it's GMP, do you have really good cost of work definitions to control and manage cost? Change orders, which is a big area. There's contract language you can do to provide more tools for school districts to audit change orders. I think change orders, making sure that they're fully substantiated, that they have good estimates, and it's not negotiated, that you really can understand what is supporting the change order, and that it's not and understand the nature of the change, right? So it could be a design error, it could be unforeseen condition, it can be an owner initiated changes. So it's really important when you have the change orders, understanding the nature of the change. And then if it's a design error, if you, for example, did a design build project, you potentially can push back on the contractor and the architect saying this isn't our change. Stakeholder perception issues, which is such a big issue in with any public construction. You can be executing the construction program perfectly, but if you're not managing stakeholders' expectations via, for example, master planning controls and updates, it can derail the success of your program. Project staffing. So we have a lot of organizations that they're in the business of conducting school, not construction. So when you get bond programs or have a capital program need, really understanding your team's expertise and capabilities, making sure that you're teaming up with trusted advisors, which may be third-party construction managers, or maybe in hiring internal staff to manage the job, or having expanded performance audits or other key parties such as legal, to ensuring that you're staffed appropriately for the construction, the complexity of it, etc. Capacity of construction companies. As we know, there's a lot of construction going on, and there's a lot of issues in the construction industry, whether it's supply chain issues that Tammy noted earlier. So really understanding that the quality of the construction companies are good, understanding their financial statements and that they have the capacity to execute the construction plan is critical. Unfilled owner and occupant requirements, just making sure that you're scoping projects that are consistent with the need. As you know, some of your ballot language or bond measures were passed many, many years ago. Needs change throughout the process, so making sure that you have strong master planning controls to adjust those for those needs are critical. Property loss, we've seen this, some of it can be very preventable. If you have a new construction program that put a bunch of new materials in place, there's generally warranty compliant conditions. So making sure that your district is monitoring those warranty compliant conditions, so that if there is something that happens on that specific material or equipment item and it's under warranty, then you don't have to repay it twice. We've seen that as a common issue. And then claims and disputes. So early detection is critical, good contract terms is critical, and then really understanding the claim and ensuring that it's compliant, it's not excessive, and it's appropriate is critical. But we find a lot of times claims can be easily prevented with early detection measures, timely change order reviews, and trusted advisors to making sure that the claim is appropriate. But today we're focusing on master planning controls, reporting, and contract terms and change orders. Next slide, please. All right. So every program, every project has a very unique timetable. So really understanding where you're at is critical. So at a high level, when you get the bond program, you got to plan for it, right? You got to understand what you need. You got to ensure you have the funding alignment definitions there. You need to facilitate scope definitions, which should line up with the ballot language, which will clearly identify what you're using. Preferably, you'll have the material specifications log so that you can answer questions saying, are we putting the Honda Civic building in, or are we doing the Lexus, right? You need to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what facility you're building, what the material specifications are, and if that is alignment in maximizing the use of the funds. Next, establish communication processes and progress meetings. So it is critical as a district and as an oversight committee member to know that when you get these bond programs, you need to make sure that you maximize it and communicate to key stakeholders. So having progress meetings with the district on current state, making sure that performance is being tracked appropriately, both budget, forecast, commitments, schedule, is critical to keep both the district on plan and then oversight aware of progress so they can report annually. Developing a master plan. So the ballot language provides a great starting point to say, hey, what are we executing? But it's critical to develop a master plan that keeps everyone on track, to evaluate it annually for appropriateness. And then, as we all know, I know we see this at a lot of school districts. The ballot language has a lot of different types of scopes and has a lot of different items as approved listed projects, but there's not potentially enough money to go around to serve all of it. So ensuring that you have a project prioritization process is critical. Next, programming, assessing the staffing model. So you need to look at this from a bond program status and a project specific status. So really understanding your expertise within your school district from a bond program management, and then also as an individual projects. And we see projects be hundreds of millions of dollars for a specific school. That may require a specific project manager in addition to a third-party construction manager, for example, to ensure that the project schedule is being met and the owner needs are being met as well. Apply best procurement practices. So in the public contracting code provides very clear definitions on ways to stay compliant with state law and regulations. However, there are things that you can also improve. For example, professional service contracts don't necessarily require 3 quotes per public contracting code. So ensuring that you have implementations in your policy for instances such as that will help you ensure that you're applying best practice procurement practices. And that can also be different contract type and project delivery methodologies. So for example, we see design, bid, build as a common use, and that might be appropriate for certain jobs, but really having the ability to do potentially a design build job with guaranteed maximum price contracts can be a superior construction delivery methodology with contract type selection to ensure that you're not paying more than you should. Defining the program structure and procedures. So this is kind of what we talked about, is you need to have the right team, and then you need to establish the right policies and procedures to keep people accountable so that if there are issues, you can hold them to the policy. So whenever you get a big program, making sure that your staffing model is appropriate, making sure that you have the right policy and procedure definitions to support the team. Building contractual controls. So we've talked about this, really defining when to use the certain contract types, when to use certain construction delivery methodologies so that you're able to utilize the best practice option for the specific project. Assessing project scheduling. This is critical. We had a story that happened a while ago that you had the facilities, and this is a common issue we see in a lot of schools and other organizations we work with. Facilities can be potentially a little bit siloed compared to the accounting operations, for example. They don't have good communication or reporting between the departments. So we had an instance where certain physical activity construction was expected to be completed in the fall that supported sports, correct? But that schedule got delayed, and that was not being communicated from facilities to the operations of the school, which caused a huge disruption within the school. So really ensuring that you have the reporting and it's timely and being reported to the correct stakeholders is critical. Design. So what are you guys building? And making sure that you're using the best contract types for the design process. For example, AIA has very defined process and procedures, making sure that your terms align with that. That can help you go through the schematic designs in a very controlled environment, making sure that you got the right owner approvals, as you had to design documents, making sure that it's getting the appropriate approvals. Key parties from the district and oversight committees are within that, making sure that you're building the appropriate specifications, and as you go into construction documents. So these sessions are critical to really define the objectives and plans. And once you start construction, if you start changing plans, that's when the change orders occur. So it's critical to have those sessions early on to really define what you're building, which relate back to the BOUT language, which ties back into the master plan. Next, review and improve management, program management process and procedures. So you got policy procedures. Are they in line with best practices? Are people executing that plan per those best practices? So once you get a bond program, getting it set up is one thing, but constant monitoring is critical to ensure that people are executing the plan per the policies, and the policies are consistent with best practice. Monitor design and planning performance. So again, it's construction is just as important as design planning process. So you can set up similar reporting metrics for construction as you can for design, making sure it's going through best practices, it's progressing as it needs to, key input is provided at the appropriate times. I'm sure many of you guys have seen this. Their design can go over budget. So if you don't have the good contract controls or performance monitoring controls, design can be just as risky as construction potentially. And then as you head into construction, you're monitoring program progress and quality. So this kind of ties back to reporting. So are you progressing towards the established metrics set up at commencement of the bond program? If not, I think a lot of people understand construction happens. There's a lot of variability to it, but are you communicating that to the appropriate stakeholders? Review cost measurement and payment controls. So here, if you have guaranteed maximum price contracts, you can have really strong cost of work definitions, making sure that people are billing only compliant cost and who's reviewing that. Other components, if it's a lump sum project, is percent complete correct. So a lot of you guys earn interest on proceeds from bond funds. So making sure that you're having the percent completes reviewed for appropriateness, or if it's a guaranteed maximum price, that the cost is compliant so that you're not overpaying and you're collecting that interest. Next, verify construction program operational compliance and financial controls. This is what we've kind of been communicating. Once you've set up shop, you have good policy procedures, constantly analyzing your processes, your staffing models for alignment with best practices, looking for inefficiencies or disconnects is critical. There's a lot of change that can occur within a bond program. A lot of staffing can change. Staffing for not only the district, but the oversight or the construction company. So constantly monitoring that can make sure that you're executing and implementing your bond program according to plan. Audit contractor records and change order financial or audit contractor cost records, change orders, financial budgetary reporting and control processes. We've covered this at length. Safety program. So safety is critical on all construction. If there's an injury that is going to impact potentially schedule and cost. So making sure that your contractors have a good safety plan and you take that seriously is important for your program. Next, closeout and completion. Evaluate your program results against targets. So if a lot of you guys with bond programs, you have a lot of construction in the pipeline. So constantly looking at, hey, we just completed this project. What went well? What didn't go well? How do we improve? So not everyone does construction perfectly, and that's okay. But learning from your mistakes is critical. So as you do your bond programs and your projects, it's critical to constantly look back, saying, how do we improve? What worked? What didn't work? How do we adjust our game plan so that we execute the next project more efficiently and effectively? Final project audit cost. This is great, but we really like early detection of potentially non-compliant cost on a guaranteed maximum price contract, for example. But doing a closeout audit, making sure that you have all those adjusted for is critical. Capture learning for improvements, which I just noted. Again, it's super critical when you finish a project, huddling up with the team. That's going to include the district, include the contractor, it can include the CBOC, and making sure you say, hey, what went well, what didn't well, how do we improve in the future? And then performed independent and balanced assessments. So this can be from an outside party doing performance audits. This can be from the CBOC. This can be from other people within the district, so that you get kind of a objective look at your program, and you're saying, hey, are we on track? Are we not on track? How do we get better? Okay, so for bond program master planning, we like the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. We find it's a great criteria to evaluate capital planning policies and procedures. We also like San Diego Taxpayers Association, which has a lot of good guidance on reporting. So per the GFOA, bond program master planning policies provide an essential framework for managing tasks and assuring the plans are consistent with the project list and overall organizational goals. So when you have your policies, this could look like it will include stuff such as the description of how stakeholder departments will collaborate. So how does your facilities department interface with your finance, which interfaces with your operational and IT, for example? A description of the role of the public and other external stakeholders in the process. So really defining what the CBOC is doing, for example, what the community's doing, what end users, for example, like a principal is doing within the process, so that you have that all defined so people understand their roles and responsibilities so that you can constructively communicate. Identification of how decisions will be made in the planning process. So it goes back to that prioritization policy or matrix, is there's more projects you have to do than funding. That's almost going to be a given. So really defining how you're going to prioritize needs will be extremely helpful when you don't have enough money to do potentially all the things on the project list, that you have a framework to say, hey, this is how we're prioritizing scope. This is how we scored it. This is how it rolls up. Provisions for monitoring and oversight of the bond program, including reporting requirements on and how to handle changes and amendments to the plan. So like we've noted before, changes are going to happen. Your needs are going to change. Some of these bond programs are over several decades, for example. So really ensuring that you have good master planning policies and procedures. So as changes need, you have that framework to say, hey, the budget is not sufficient to cover all the needs. These are our updated scope priorities. This is our framework for getting key input. This is how we update the plan. Percent of project complete, percentage of project budget expended. So having that framework of saying, hey, this is current state. It needs, we find a common issue with districts is they only look, in other organizations, they may only approve budgets yearly, but you really, for construction, have to look at the bond program in total and then projects in total, and those have different phasing. So really understanding where the projects are at, what's left over, is there enough to execute the original game plan? If not, how do we prioritize it? How do we adjust budgets to meet our stakeholders' needs? Next slide. Okay, reporting. This is huge. So really having a good understanding of percent of the project completed, percent of the project budget expended, progress on key project milestones, contract status, including what's remaining, revenue, expenditure activity, cash flow and investment maturities, making sure that you have the funding necessary to meet the requirements, funding commitments, and available appropriations. So if we take a step back, what we really like seeing within bond programs is both summary and detailed information available. We like real-time data, where potentially utilizing software systems such as like Domo or Tableau or other types of technology options where you can pull data real time, and that could interface with both your accounting software systems and potentially construction software systems like like Prolog, which can help manage project schedule, et cetera. So when you have that real-time reporting available and you have the KPIs such as budget, project forecast, commitments, expenditures, and a short detail of, hey, these are the milestones of where we're at, whether it's in design or construction, that serves as a critical item to promote accountability and transparency, not only with the district, but with the stakeholders. So when you go back to your districts, really looking at the reporting and saying, hey, are we getting the information that we need real time? Do they have the KPIs that we need to really kind of understand the project's the project status or the bond program status? If it's not there, then I think the GFOA is a great criteria to say, hey, this is best practice. How do we get the best practice? And maybe the district may not understand that these are kind of the best practice KPIs, or maybe they're having staffing shortages where maybe a technology solution proposal may be a good fit for that specific program. Next slide, please. So a couple extra measures, comparison of results. So this can both be financial, schedule, quality data, highlights of significant changes to project scope, cost, schedule, or funding. So generally, if you're mid-project, we don't like seeing significant project scope changes. That means something happened in the planning stages that probably could have been approved, but it does happen. So if you do have those types of changes, really having clear definitions on, hey, this was original budget, this is what changed, we're within the 10% limitation of PCC, so we're compliant on that end, and really having that good reporting so people can understand why budget changed. And we find that when you have this level of detail and it's real time and it's communicated transparently, it helps bridge the gap. We've seen many districts, and Tammy can attest to this, when it's not reported correctly, even if it's by the book, it may not appear that way to key stakeholders. So making sure the district is reporting best practice, they're transparent in terms of changes to project scope, it may be very justifiable. But when you have these KPIs, it triggers those types of discussions so that people can clearly understand, hey, we had changes because of XYZ. It may have been supply chain issues. It could have been other factors, but really having the itemized detail and transparency at both the project and those project rolling up to the bond program level are critical. And then confirmation of continued availability. There's been many instances where we get involved at the very end and they're like, we have no money to complete our construction projects. Then they find out once there's no more money in the bank. So it's critical when you're doing these, the reporting for your bond program is really understanding current state. So what's the budget? What's the forecast? What's been committed? What's the original budget for this bond program? And do we have the cash flow and cash needed to execute the plan? And it could be the plan could have been executed perfectly and maybe supply chain issues increase cost. We see that all the time, but having that early detection allows the district to say, hey, we need more funds. Do we get more funding from a bond, another bond? Do we have other pockets within the general fund that can maximize the use of funds? But it's critical to identify these gaps early on so you have time to evaluate the best potential option for your school. All right, contract types, strategies, and controls, everyone's favorite topic. So I'll just kind of go over the different contract types. You have lump sum, which means it's stipulated, you agree to it, it should be competitively bid. Time and materials, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's based off time and materials. We like having rates or actual cost definitions established upfront. Time and material can be risky for districts absent good controls over what they're doing, very clear definitions on scope and management controls. If it's not managed appropriately, Time and materials can get excessive, consistent with cost plus. So our favorite contract type is the guarantee maximum price contract. It involves generally key stakeholders early on in the project, including the architect, the contractor, and the design build environment, so that you flush out design errors collaboratively as a team, so that when you get into construction, the guarantee maximum price is exactly that. It's going to be the maximum price. And if it comes in under budget via good operations from the contractor or good cost of work definitions, and you were able to manage costs tightly, then those savings could be provided back to the district, or potentially a savings clause incentive for the project team, because a happy contractor and owner relationship is important for bond programs. A right to audit clause. So we love seeing these in guarantee maximum price contracts. It allows school districts to evaluate, hey, were the costs incurred and billed to the district compliant with the contract terms? Were they excessive? Right to audit clauses are great, but they're only as good as your cost of work definition. So really ensuring that you get legal or a certified construction auditor to evaluate your contract and cost of work definitions is critical. And we have another slide later on that we can kind of go further in depth on that. We like in right to audit clauses, no audit scope limitation. So we don't say one audit, we say audits. We like transparency when we do these types of projects. So really having the ability to review cost records at any point of the construction project is very helpful for the school district. Requiring all supporting documentation upon request within reasonable amounts of time is helpful, so that you can say, hey, yeah, we were billed this and they incurred this and this is all appropriate. And this can be a great tool for both owners and contractors to increase accountability, transparency, and collaboration. Some of our biggest clients are contractors. So that's normally something that people find very unique, but we find the cost of work definitions for guarantee maximum price contracts can be a very critical tool to have both parties agree on, hey, this is a compliant cost, this is how we're going to bill it. And that allows both sides to really understand what's going to be incurred, and it avoids the surprises at the end. So a good example of this is if a lot of guarantee maximum price contracts say labor costs are allowable. People will have differing opinions on what labor costs could mean. That could mean potentially bonuses. It could mean rates versus actual cost. It could mean different type of burden components. So really having those clear definitions up front within the contract terms supports accountability, transparency, and collaboration with all project stakeholders. Next slide. All right, for change orders, everyone's biggest risk or biggest thing that keeps them up at night. So the normal process for change orders is you get a request for information, you get a change order request, and then you get the change order. What we really like seeing whenever change orders are provided, it is fully itemized. So it's more than one or two sheets of saying what it is. It's really defining everything that's included within that change order. The nature of the change, like we noted earlier, is critical. If it's not owner initiated, there's generally areas where you can push back and say, hey, this was in the design documents, this is not a change. So really understanding the different root causes of a change order and ensuring that if it is pushed to you, the nature is appropriate for the school district, and then making sure that it's itemized. And what we also like seeing is the change order is approved by the owner, architect, and general contractor. So the architect and engineer can be very important in this process, saying, yeah, this was a design error, for example, and this is partially appropriate change order for the school district, or maybe, which we like early detection of this, if the owner is changing design plans mid-construction, that you get those reporting capabilities saying, hey, changes are being made to design. Is that appropriate? Is the cost justification worth it? So that you can early detect potentially those types of decision making processes, saying, hey, how do we go backwards to the design and planning phases to prevent owner initiated changes? So we really like seeing the nature of the change order reported and the appropriate sign-offs on there. And generally, you shouldn't be paying for subcontractor, GC, or architect and engineer errors or damages. So we see this often where there's something damaged on construction and it creates a change or a schedule impact, and they try pushing the change order to the district. If you have good cost definitions within your contract terms, this should provide the school enough tools to say, no, this isn't our cost. This was an error provided by you. Here's the contract clause that prevents this being a allowable charge for the district. Okay, so I love this slide. So this provides the different cost types within a construction contract. On the left side, these are the different risks for that cost type, and the good controls are defined on the right side. So this is primarily applicable for guaranteed maximum price contracts. So for labor overcharges, to prevent that, and this can be for both project and bond program management type charges, is you want detailed timekeeping, like a time card, and you want appropriate review controls over those timekeeping records, whether it's the bond program or the project specific, if you have the right to audit clause. So having those monitoring controls and reviews done by the appropriate parties can help detect and control costs. Excessive change order costs is a common risk. So as we just went through it, making sure that your planning and design phases, architectural agreements are following best practices that are defined like in AIA. You have the right controls in place at that point. You're not changing design plans after construction has started, can help you push back on a lot of change orders and making sure that they're fully itemized and auditable. Cost management issues and surprises. So making sure that you have detailed reporting from the project and bond program at a total level, and then really going to the source data at the contractor level, ensuring what the estimates are, where are we at percent complete, are we hitting the key milestones per the construction schedule, etc. Excessive rental equipment cost. So rental costs can be kind of two factors. You have the third party and you have the contractor owned equipment. So when you have these mega projects, there's going to be equipment on site. So really understanding what those pieces of equipment are going to be. Is it cheaper to buy it or lease it? And if you're leasing it, it's okay if the contractor is using their equipment or third party, but really understanding what the rental rates are, what's the fair market value for that piece of equipment, having potential thresholds on rental rates cannot exceed those fair market value thresholds, so that they can prove out that you should be renting it, not buying it. And not necessarily that you want a bunch of construction equipment on a school site, but some maintenance departments, so you're really maximizing the fund. Excessive contractor costs and overpayments. So like what we said before, having strong cost to work definitions. Can you guys still hear me? I got a pop up on my screen that internet connection got.
Yeah,
I think
you went up for a second, but you're back.
Okay. I think my internet got sleepy with cost to work definitions. So, okay. Next, hidden contractor profit centers. So what we find, if you do the guarantee maximum price with strong cost to work definitions, it really removes the hidden profit centers, really has defined profit centers, which is okay. Right. We're okay with contractors making profit, but we want to make sure that they're not making too much. So really having strong cost to work definitions with clear profit centers keeps everyone happy. Unallowable charges. So this can be both at the bond program level and at the project level specifically. So constantly monitoring what costs are being incurred by the school district and the project level, and making sure that it's appropriate with the ballot language and then the contract terms. Overbilled subcontractor costs. So this could be where they at on their schedule. This could be, do they have strong contract terms at the sub level? We just did a project this week where subcontractors didn't have defined contract budgets and they went over budget, right? So if you, at the contractor level, making sure you have a good understanding of the sub level or potentially the sub level, making sure they're all defined contracts, there's competitive subcontracting bid procedures so that it rolls up competitively and controlled. Excessive insurance costs. So within your construction projects that you likely have general liability insurance, potentially CSIP insurance, builder's risk insurance, subguard insurance. So really understanding what insurance products are being charged, not only within the cost of work definitions, but that are needed to support the project. For example, subguard insurance is a common insurance product we see on many projects, and maybe it's appropriate based off whatever the risk profile you guys are trying to manage, but really ensuring that the rates are stipulated. It's being applied at a competitive rate, and it's utilizing the correct cost basis. So we had a recent project where subguard insurance was being applied on the total contract sum, not the subcontract values. So if you take a step back, they applied, and this was per the contract. The contract had the application on the wrong cost basis. So that resulted in a couple $1 million of excessive charges on a insurance product that was being applied on the contract sum, not the contract subcontractor level. So really understanding insurance and rates is critical to preventing overcharges. Okay, so the Bond Oversight Committee, just kind of going over what are you guys here to do? So in summary, we can go through this in detail, but it's really to inform the public on the district's expenditures of the bond revenues. It's to actively review and report on the proper expenditure of taxpayers' money for the school district, and to produce and present an annual report to summarize the committee's findings, proceedings, and activities within the prior year. And I think the other critical point here is making sure that, to Tammy's point earlier, on really understanding at the district level who's charging their time and making sure that it's directly for the projects and that no funds are being used for teachers or admin salaries and other school operating expenses that are not appropriate based off the ballot language. All right, so here are some best practices that you guys can be doing: receiving and reviewing copies of the annual independent performance audits and independent financial audits, and understanding the differences. So a lot of performance audits don't have the expanded objectives. The minimum requirement within the state of California is making sure that the expenditures equal the ballot language. That's the minimum requirement. We like the expanded performance audits, as we know the expenditures could be compliant, but they may be excessive, right? So like if you aren't using best construction delivery methodologies or best construction types, or not managing change orders and schedule, there could be excessive charges within those expenditures, right? But technically from the performance audit, that would be compliant, but we know that there was costly practices built in there. So we like the expanded performance audits or other types of performance tracking metrics, which can be an auditor or outside advisor saying, hey, are we doing this efficiently? Are we doing this effectively? Are we complying with PCC? Are we applying best practices? Are our process and procedures optimal? So really having those tools at the oversight committee level, understanding, hey, are these compliant? Yes. Are we being efficient and effective with the bond proceeds? Yes. Next, inspecting school facilities to ensure bond revenues are expended. So this is a great kind of tool for oversight committee members to do meetings, see what's being built, look at progress, look at project status reporting. So if your project status reporting are saying, yeah, we're all good, we're going to be delivering the gymnasium by fall, and you go take a walk in the summer and you haven't even started construction, there's a problem. So I think you guys can provide a critical tool saying, hey, is this progressing as the progress reports that were being provided? Is it all looking reasonable? Receiving and reviewing copies of any deferred maintenance. So really understanding what are the deferred maintenance items, what are the quantities, reviewing master plan, making sure potentially you need to prioritize scope for immediate needs, that it's compliant with the ballot language, you're prioritizing it appropriate from the policy procedures, your community and the stakeholders. So deferred maintenance is a great tool for oversight members to say, hey, are we using the funds compliantly, and are we maximizing the benefit for the school with these bond proceeds? Reviewing efforts by the school or community college district to maximize bond revenues by implementing cost saving measures. So this could be informing them or educating them on contract type selections. It could be looking for different revenue sources to maximize the funds. It could be identifying opportunities, saying, hey, HVAC, we need across all of the schools. Let's procure not school by school, but go wide to reach the best value. So we find oversight members can be just as critical as the district on identifying these opportunities, communicating constructively so that you support a successful bond program. All right, a request list. So us auditors, when we get engaged to do the expanded performance audits, these are kind of the request items we're looking for to get current state. We're looking at facilities organizational chart. Who's on the team? Is it third party? Is it all school district? What does the governance structure and roles and responsibilities look like? Master planning. When did you last do it? If you haven't done it for 10 years and you're still operating, you may need to update it. Let's take a deeper look there. Program policies and procedures. This can be both at the school level district on who's doing what, and it can be if you have a third-party construction manager supporting the district, what are their policy procedures? Does that line up with what you guys are doing? Are there proper controls over those third-party providers? Staffing plan. This can be both at the bond program level and at the construction level. So consistent with your org structure, what's the plan? We've seen school districts that they don't use third-party providers and they go internal, and that can potentially be excessive. So really understanding your staffing plan, making sure that it's competitive, making sure you have policies to evaluate the competitiveness of it so that you are staffed appropriately for the level of construction you guys have.
And I would just add that when we're thinking about who on the district is really involved in that team, it's important to also understand what are their sort of capabilities, because school districts are in the business of educating students, right? And so you may have great facilities people that have run these large capital programs and all in other districts or in other industries, but you also may have people who haven't done that before. And so just thinking about their experience and what they're really able to bring to the table. And that's where the expanded performance audit could also be helpful as well, to have us come in and sort of say, okay, here are some of the best practices that you can think about implementing, and provide all those sort of tools and materials for them to be able to enhance the program. So just another note about sort of who's involved in this capital program oversight.
100%. So we see that all the time where you'll have a school or a hospital get a bond program and they don't put the right team or advisors with the right experience, and they can potentially fall into the common pitfalls that we've talked about. Like it could be a change order, it could be change in design plans, not understanding that once you start construction, that's not the time to start doing scope sessions. So we see it all the time of not having the right team in place and having it roll up with good policy procedures, governance, roles, defined roles and responsibilities. Performance tracking. So we love seeing what the district's doing internally and how they're reporting it to the CBOC. So we have the GFOA, which we kind of reported today, that you can point to as great criteria of how to review and assess a capital program. San Diego Taxpayers Association also has really good criteria as well. So making sure that your reporting is consistent with that. If it's not, it could be a good opportunity for you to talk with your district saying, hey, this is San Diego Taxpayers Association, or here's GFOA. Here are some best practice KPIs that we're not seeing on our report. Is this possible for us to get on this? So we find having that constructive collaboration with the district is great, so that you guys can perform your function in the oversight role, and maybe you might be able to say, hey, we're not doing milestone or design planning reporting. This would be a good tool for the district, and it may be beneficial for them to be evaluating the project at that state. Expenditure reports. So this is just what are the cost centers, what's the expenditures hitting the bond program. Labor reporting, who's getting charged to the bond program. Are their roles appropriate? Is their time fully supported by time cards? Purchase order log. So we love these. We like seeing commitments on best practice KPIs, but what are the commitments? Where are the commitments at? So percent complete, and having a good old fashioned purchase order log can identify a lot of progress or potentially detect some risk. The CBOC website. So we love seeing the CBO website with who's on the committee, annual reports, meeting minutes, progress reporting. So we like seeing items such as that are aligned with best practice and requirements to support transparency with the community. And then sampling contracts, change orders, expenditures, and labor charges. So when we do these audits, we're looking at contracts, we're looking how they're procured, how they're managed in the design, construction phase, potentially, how change orders are being evaluated, what are the contract terms to support the change orders allowability, are the nature of the changes being reported in a way that are meaningful for the district to mitigate and detect potential not alignment with best practices, expenditures, are they allowable or not allowable, and labor charges. And then a check register report. Were these amounts paid? Right. So we did a construction audit not that long ago where we were asking for payment registers at the GC level, and we were finding that they weren't paying the subs, but they were getting paid. So a good old fashioned check register is a good way of saying, hey, are we paying our vendors timely? If not, what is the reason? It could be an operational issue. It could be a bigger issue. So really understanding the payments, are they aligned with the invoices? Are they being paid timely? Is a great practice. And then some of the benefits of an expanded performance audit. We are obviously biased because we live in this world, but every program we go to, we always have an area where we can say, hey, you can improve here, you can optimize here, you can get more transparency here or consistency through policy procedures. So really engaging an outside professional that focuses on capital programs. It can be a performance auditor, it can be other party. But I think the benefit of the performance audit, we have to conduct ours under GAGA standards. So there's a not only a CPE requirement, but a reporting methodology to support transparency. And the benefits of a performance audit, it can early detect, it can provide project economy efficiencies and cost controls. It can prevent and detect early issues going on. It can validate compliance with public contracting code and competitiveness of procurement and contract type procedures. It can tighten up internal controls and project controls. As you know, the bond programs can be multi-million, multi-billion dollars. And if you're off by 0.1%, it can be millions of dollars. So really engaging an outside stakeholder that are looking at the expanded performance audit elements can really result in significant cost savings. Reduction in errors and overcharges, improved communication. So as I noted before, we've seen many times districts are executing their plan perfectly, but their communication with stakeholders is not. So making sure that you get an outside party saying, hey, we're seeing these disconnects. This is what we see works. Here's criteria that's best practice, can help kind of bridge the gap and promote kind of collaboration amongst the key parties. A continuous an evolution towards a continuous improvement. So sometimes people perceive auditors of kind of like gotcha moments, and that's not how these should be interpreted. Really, the performance audit is a tool saying, hey, this is how we can improve. this is what you did well this year. This is what's still outstanding. This is where you guys need to go, and this is how you're going to get there. So the performance audit can be a very helpful tool, making sure that, hey, this is the current state. Here's some areas we need to work on, and then this is how we improve, to kind of promote the constructive dialogue with the district and the CBOC, and then protection of stakeholder funds. So having these expanded performance audits, someone that's independent outside of the program, evaluating the program based off best practices and good criteria, helps identify early issues, which can protect the stakeholder funds. So we are fans of performance audits. And that brings us to questions.
Well, I want to thank Steve and Tammy for outstanding presentation. I'm Anton Younghair. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Bond Oversight Committee. I'm going to be managing the questions. We have a variety of questions. We'll not be able to get to all of them because we're going to have to end at 11:30 to keep on schedule, but we'll answer as many as we can. And any questions we do not answer during this period, you can go to our website, bondoversight.org, and on the help desk, you can ask us any question, and we'll answer all the questions that are submitted to the website. Steve, the first question I have, the bond lawyer who advises the College of San Francisco determined that the language of the $845 million bond measure from 2020 should not have a list of specific bond projects. And this determination was made based on a court decision. So how does the performance auditor determine whether a project is in the project list?
That is a great question that I'll attempt to take a crack at. We're not lawyers. So, but what we like is transparency and accountability. We really like defined project list for the district's protection and from an oversight, transparency, and CBOC perspective. So if you have bond funds that are being provided by the taxpayers and that community, we see it as a total win to say, hey, this is what we're going to build. This is our plan. Here's our master planning policies, procedures. This is how we evaluate and prioritize scopes of work. And you have that formalized framework. So as needs change, which they do, we see that on many of these bond programs that last over decades, that you have a framework that you can say, this is best practice. This is our framework. This is how we adjust for changing needs, so that you can keep transparency and accountability to the stakeholders, and you have that reporting mechanism to report, so that the CBOC, when they do their annual reports, can say, yes, we're meeting the plan, we're meeting the expectations, we're meeting the needs of the community through the bond program. So yeah, we like lists, and we like defined scopes, and we like strong master planning, policy procedures, and performance tracking against that.
And we've certainly encountered that before, where there's been a project that bond funds were used for, and we couldn't quite tell based on the ballot language whether that was allowable or not. And we just report that there's a question and a determination needs to be made. But we at least elevate that within our report to point it out to those who are charged with governance, that there's a question here that does need to be determined.
Thank you. Next question. Can employees working on the bond projects be paid from the bond?
Yes. So there's clear definitions on what is an allowable project labor type and what is not, and what the nature of that labor, of the roles and responsibilities of that person are. So if they have a good title, but they're not working on the bond program, not allowable. So you really got to understand the project type, their roles and responsibilities per their job description. When you do the interview, discuss what they are performing. If it's directly for the project, it should be consistent with the state law.
And that's one of the components that we think about with an expanded performance audit is we're able to go through and look at who is charging labor to the project that might be internal to the district and validate that those charges are appropriate based on their role and their involvement in the bond program.
Next question. By law, does the school district require to get the Independent Citizens Bond Oversight Committee involved during the master planning process?
I don't think it's a law, but we do think it's a best practice that you engage the school district has those master planning policy procedures. They have that framework and scope facilitation discussions with key members of the community, the school, the bond oversight committee. We find engagement from the oversight and community is a great thing for both the school and everyone involved. Really getting we find there's a lot of oversight committee members that have awesome experience. They are interested in the CBOC because that was maybe how they spent their career. So we see it as a total value add to engage, really define, again, through the master planning policy procedures, the engagement, the appropriate times, defining the roles and responsibilities of those parties so that when you are compiling your master plan and scope definitions that you're making, obviously you can't make everyone happy with that, but if you have that framework, that prioritization, that the scoring kind of matrix and framework up front, you can at least understand why the decision was made, which we like just from a transparency and accountability standpoint.
Thank you. As a member of an independent committee, how do I hold the school district accountable for questionable practices or sensitive financial issues related to construction bids, process, and change orders? So
I would recommend a performance audit. Expanded would be a great tool to kind of identify those specific process and procedures. I think having a good understanding of what it was, and I think having constructive communication with the district saying, hey, like we'd like to see 3 bids, for example, or ensuring that the right contract delivery methodologies are being applied and contract type selection is being made. Again, sometimes we go to school districts and they're just not aware of these because they don't have a good team around them. So I find having constructive dialogue in this space, having expanded performance audits or reporting to key stakeholders is a great tool to say, hey, these are practices that were done. This is how we can improve to better use the funds that are being provided.
And one of the benefits of having a performance audit is that it is being done under those audit standards. So there's very little opportunity for someone to say, oh, that's not really what happened. Of course, we had all of these bid documents, you just didn't see them. That's not going to happen in a performance audit. We're going to get all the information that we need and report on potential deficiencies. And the fact that you have a third party that did this work under very specific standards will potentially elevate those concerns to the appropriate level and make sure that they're being addressed. And again, it's really important to have that third party involvement, just from even a community trust building perspective, because your reputation could easily be tarnished. And it's really important to think about how we're protecting the school district's reputation as we're thinking about, okay, we've identified a concern here. We need to implement these recommendations to show taxpayers that we are good stewards of public funds.
Next, her question. I heard Tammy mention that bond funds under Prop 39 can be used for school upgrade and renovations. Can you please elaborate?
Sure. So you can use bond funds for any of the projects that are listed in the ballot, and those could include renovations, upgrades, seismic retrofits. Anything that was in that list is totally fair game. And that's what we're doing is in the bare minimum performance audit, we're going through looking at expenditures and making sure that those expenditures aligned with whatever the projects that were listed in that ballot measure.
Next question. Can you comment on the process for reevaluating project lists based on analyzing the impact of construction inflation?
Great question. So yeah, I mean, we're in an environment of lot of inflation, a lot of supply chain issues, costs are increasing, labor costs are increasing. So within the master planning policy and procedures in framework, having updated estimates for your bond program and project is extremely important. Especially as we know that bond programs generally it's limited, right? And your needs are potentially infinite. So really having a good understanding of the updated forecast and estimates for projects and future needs is critical, making sure that you have early detection of running out of funds potentially, or not being able to get to certain projects. So when you have your master planning policies and framework, having that constant evaluation of, hey, if costs are going up, how are we estimating these? Are we going to have the appropriate amount of fundings to meet our needs?
Yeah, master planning is really your key to really thinking about how are you prioritizing projects if the dollar amount associated with them changes, which certainly has happened over the last 2 years.
Please talk about how conflicts are resolved when a district challenges some of the change orders or the construction team insists on their validity. Is it entirely a matter of negotiations? These are not necessarily public discussions.
Right. So I think for schools, what we like seeing is within the contract language is having real depth. They'll work with their lawyers and bond counsel, but having good audit rights, right to audit clauses within their contracts that define what is a change order. How do you substantiate a change order, and having the ability to audit that change order to cost is a great practice. So I think from a audit standpoint, we like seeing the right to audit clause, really strong definitions around what is how do you substantiate a change order, and then working with the contractor and architect on when they submit change orders to you, the nature of the change. So if it's a design error or a repair and damage that was conducted on the job site, having your team kind of evaluate the nature of the change and saying, hey, was this owner initiated? Is this an appropriate change for the district, or are the contract provisions supportive of this not being a district charge? So I think having an understanding of the contract language.
Thank you. There's a question, can we access the recording? The answer is yes. There's also a question, I'd like to get a copy of the PowerPoint that'll be available.
Controls around change orders, making sure that change orders are fully substantiated and that the root cause is defined with appropriate sign-offs.
Okay, I think I talked over you.
So I think my internet cut out again. It needs some more coffee.
So the recordings will be available and the PowerPoints will be available. Can you explain how a CBOC can use ongoing purchase orders list to keep track of project progress? Great
question. So I'll take a first crack, and I know Tammy is awesome with reporting, but within the GFOA KPIs, we like commitments being a specific component of the report so that you can see budget, forecast, commitments, so that you can early detect if the commitments are in excess of budget or forecast, that's a problem. So I think a purchase order log is generally a very common report or easily run report for the school. I think having it set up in a way that can distinguish on bond program is beneficial from a efficiency standpoint for the district if they're trying to create best practice KPIs and reporting. But yeah, I think the purchase order log is a very strong reporting tool to say, hey, what's been procured? Is there a budget? Do those budgets line with the contracts? Is this within the total bond program budget?
Yeah, you just want to work with your staff at the district to make sure that the report is understandable, that you're not just getting a random log and trying to figure out which project does this purchase order relate to, or which projects. Again, if we're thinking about if we're renovating HVAC systems in 3 schools, we might have 1 PO for that rather than 3 separate POs. And then you're taking advantage of economies of scale, which is a great thing. So again, it's working with your district staff to really understand what are the budget to actuals on each of the project and the program as a whole.
Can a project audit be paid for by bond funds, or must it be paid for from general funds?
I would talk with bond counsel. We've seen both ways. We're not, we normally don't get too involved in that interpretation. But I think if it's directly supporting the bond program, we generally see bond counsel making a case that it's directly for the benefit of the bond program. But we would work with the bond counsel to confirm that it's aligned with counsel.
It is a requirement for the bond to have the financial and the performance audit. And so because it's an inherent requirement, we can often see it come out of the bond funds, but not necessarily.
Are districts required to disclose all costs per a voter approved construction bond?
So I don't know if there's specific guidance in that area, but we do think that it's a good practice for, if we look at the tools that are defined in the law, I don't think it clearly says all invoices, all contracts, all change orders. So I think what we find works the best is having reasonable requests from the district on these types of reports or sampling thereof. The performance audit can be a tool. We get this data when we do our procedures. We ask for the total cost population for that year. We do a sample selection statistically to make our sample selection. We find a lot of school districts, they're more than happy to kind of provide that same level of detail to the bond oversight committee. Just be mindful of kind of the staffing. Maybe they may have some staffing shortages issues, but I think having reasonable requests and good reporting that you can say, hey, yeah, the reports are reliable. We did a sample on kind of the cost report data to ensure that rolls up from a job cost, labor distribution, or PO standpoint. But I think having those conversations with the district is a good thing that you can do. And I think it's a best practice because the CBOC does the annual report. The district wants a good positive report from the CBOC so that that the community knows that on behalf of the CBOC that the district is doing what they said they were going to do. So I think having a very constructive and collaborative relation between the CBOC and district is beneficial for all parties.
This is the last question for this session with Steve and Tammy. Can bond dollars be used for litigation related to the builder issues?
So again, legal question, but we see, I think to Tammy's point, if the legal issues occurred from the project that's specifically identified in the ballot language listed projects, then we see a lot of council say, yes, that is appropriate because that is specifically because of the bond program.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I'll let you
Yes, this is good.
go on
Thank
to
you
the
so
next
much.
session.
Yeah, this was a very